Hello there, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Political Scope. I'm your host, Edward Lane, and my guest this evening is the Honorable Gail Teixeira, Presidential Advisor on Governance, and of course, Chief Whip of the Government in the National Assembly.
Thank you.
Welcome to the program.
Thanks. And Happy New Year.
Same to you. Well, some politicians are making some irresponsible statements, of course, with the aim of gaining political mileage. It is a normal practice of politicians sometimes to make certain statements. However, some of these statements are impacting the integrity of citizens. More so, the statements are finding their way into sections of the media who are more or less gullible to these sexy kind of political statements. One such statement that has been repeated over and over as of recent is that of Guyana being ruled by a dictatorship. I want, before I get to you, Mr. Shearer, is to share a little perspective on the issue of dictatorship. And based on the definitions, when you look at the definitions of dictatorship, it talks about a country, government, or the form of government in which absolute power is exercised by a dictator, by an individual. And the fundamental aspect, the types of power that is a government that holds absolute power, an authority, and secondly, the method of exercising this power generally uses totalitarian methods to hold power, where human rights and rule of law are undermined and eroded completely. Dictatorships are characterized by unlimited, uncontrolled power, and democratic and civil liberties are under attack. And where the Constitution, if there is one, is being honored in the breach, and where there are limitations on representative bodies. Is that Guyana? Is that the case in Guyana?
No, it's not Guyana. It is certainly, I mean, you're very young, but probably if we look just at the continent we're on, that describes the dictators and the dictatorships that existed in the 70s and 80s on the continent of South America. If you looked at Brazil, you looked at Chile, you looked at Guatemala, you looked at Colombia, all of these, this is what was going on. And in Guyana, with the Burnham regime from 1966 right through to the time when he died, and then Hoyt came in. So that describes it correctly. When we're talking about a dictatorship in the name of a government, that's what you're talking about. And it doesn't just mean ruling authoritatively and controlling everything. It comes at the cost of rule of law being undermined, human rights being undermined, representational issues not being heard and stuff like that. And basically, it brings in the compromising of the judiciary and so forth. So that that when the opposition has said that, I remember the rally at Coffee Square just near here, after the prorogation of the parliament, I sat there in my office and heard speaker after speaker talking about the PUP civic dictatorship and the removal and the overthrow, and calling on the creation, like Dr. Ruben Ryan, of a pro-democracy movement to change the government. I think for those of us who are born in that area, who have been politicians in that area, the word dictatorship is extremely offensive, because our lives, all our young lives, were spent ending that dictatorship of the PNC and bringing in, after free and fair elections, to build a democratic state. And so it is highly offensive. For me personally, it really goes against my grain. However, for many of the younger generation who may not know what that era was like, it sounds like a catchphrase that sounds okay, you could use it. But is that relevant to Guyana? And is it relevant to Guyana now? And the answer is no, because the basic premise is that we talk about dictatorships is a government ruling in supreme authority in which citizens have no say, basically. if we go through the basic tenets of when you condemn or accuse a government of being dictatorial and being a dictatorship, let's go through some of those things. Is there a free press in Guyana? Yes, there is. There's a very free press in Guyana. And that's one of the basic tenets, I believe, when you look at whether society is democratic or not. Is there open and free press? Yes, there is. The government has one newspaper, one television, and one radio station. There are 20 television stations in Guyana, 13 radio stations, and 4 daily newspapers. And they're privately owned. Three of whom of the newspapers are privately owned. So the private sector is in control of the mass media in Guyana. And certainly the media is expected to comply with the constitution and the laws of the country. If you look at the electoral laws, because dictators generally don't like elections and they don't hold elections, or that if there are elections, they're rigged. We have had, from 1992 to now, 5 elections that have been free and fair, that have been observed by international observers, that have seen that they are free and fair elections, and that the PPP has won these elections. At no point were they an accusation or that the elections were fraudulent. And so we're proud of that. We're proud of that history of people having the right and the freedom to vote for who they want, unencumbered, unfettered, on election day. So those are 2 aspects that throws that issue out. The third issue is the rule of law. And who are the persons who are, or the entities that deal with the rule of law? The executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The judiciary is intact. It is independent. It doesn't bow to the government. There are many cases the government loses and some that it wins in the courts. The civilian law enforcement officers, agencies, are loyal to the Constitution. They don't have to salute to the PNC flag, the palm tree, as they had in the 70s and 80s. The access to justice in terms of people being able to have their day in court, and the fact that the human rights of Guyana, we are building a democratic nation, but any citizen can go to the court on a constitutional motion that their human right is being violated. And so where are the violations? Where are the limitations on human rights? We are free to speak, we're free to go to rallies, we're free to go to protests, picketing and so on. The opposition has not been prevented from having a say. They have not been prevented from holding their picketings in front of the office of the president. They have not been prevented by using Coffee Square or wherever they want to protest. What they're told is that there's certain rules by law that you have to do when you're protesting, and that's it. So that the opposition has not been encumbered in any way by this government in exercising their rights. The problem, of course, for the opposition is recognizing that they are the opposition and not the government. And if we go to our Constitution, what is special about the Constitution of Guyana? And, you know, I was thinking about all these accusations of failed state, narco state, criminalized economy, dictatorship. And I was tracing back in my mind the last 50 years of Guyana. And in fact, in the last 22 years, 23 years, the state has been actually, as an emerging democratic state, has been quite resilient. Because when you have a failed state, is that when the state collapses, nothing works. You know, the institutions of the state, the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, don't work. That's when we talk about a failed state. And so the opposition is throwing these terms around, and they're intellectuals, so-called intellectuals and opinion makers who are making these statements. And they're absolutely fallacious, and they're trying to mamagai or to fool Guyanese people because these are catchphrases, and it's easy to say dictatorship rather than say, look, we have some problems, we don't agree with the government on this, or we agree with the government on this. So the accusation of Guyana and the PPPC being a dictatorship is absolutely incorrect. And in fact, the converse is the issue. And that is that the opposition is actually, I believe, the ones that are dictatorial. They're the ones that you have a rather unusual situation in Guyana where the opposition is in fact the dictatorship, that it is the opposition by this myth of the one seat that they feel that they can run government from outside of government. They can run the government from the parliament. They can cut the budget. They cut, what was it, 90 billion, which is equivalent of 450 million US dollars from the country's budgets over the last 3 years. And therefore, to force the government to become unpopular because you can't deliver the goods, and therefore then to remove the government. So basically, the opposition has been behaving, and I say to the Guyanese public, that do not take lightly the behavior of the opposition in the legislature, in the National Assembly, because they're casting their shadow as to what could happen were they, if they were to ever get into government. Because if they are taking such anti-national and dictatorial positions outside of government, one hates to think of what would happen were they to get into government. And the worst thing for any opposition, I believe, who wants to get into government, they have kind of thrown out basic rules of politicians. For example, if you're in the opposition, you speak for all Guyanese. You speak for all the people. Obviously, you have supporters in different groups. The opposition has, every time in Parliament, on major issues, a MILA, the anti-money laundering, whatever the issues are, the environmental tax and whatever, they speak about their constituency. And therefore, are they saying to the people who voted for the PPC that they don't count? That if they were to get into government, they don't count? These are indications to me, as a political scientist, of very dangerous trends in the opposition in terms of their behavior and their actual anti-national, as I said before. But clearly, it is almost as if, you know, they are casting shadows, and in fact, the shadow is on them, because they come out of a history, particularly the PNC and the APNU, come out of a history of dictatorial behavior.
But such statement, Mr. Shearer, I think, while one may view it as something to whip up political support or to create some sort of impression and playing with the psyche of citizens, how would this maybe affect the thinking of average Guyanese when it's loaded with certain interpretations? For example, sure. I want to come back to the definition that I gave you earlier.
Yeah.
When it talked about unlimited, uncontrolled power, yeah. Civil liberties under attack. Sometimes if there's a constitution, totally ignoring the constitution, yeah. How will it affect, bearing in mind what you would have said, where we came from and where we are?
Yeah. I think that they are hoping that the Guyanese population will fall for that kind of propaganda, to put it lightly. But I have always believed, and I still believe, that the Guyanese population are extremely, you know, conscious, and that they've come out of a history of struggle for democracy, a struggle for change, a struggle to reduce poverty. Look, when in 1992-91, one of the studies that were done showed that Guyana, 67% of the population lived below the poverty line. And certainly, if the PNC has problems when they look at that and they don't want to hear those things in the APNU, because obviously, this was part of the problem with dictatorships is they can't deliver the goods, because they're either shoring up a particular group or they're supported by the army and the police and so forth in order to maintain power or rigged elections. So that 67% of the population live below the poverty line. Today, it is the reverse. 67% of the population live above the poverty line. And therefore, people are not, I think people, memories aren't that short, that people either from their grandparents or their parents know what happened before. And certainly, I think this is an indication the opposition is also grasping at straws. They're really grasping at straws, because The arguments they've taken on the Constitution are fallacious. They're wrong. The arguments that they have said that the government is not listening to people and so forth. The PPP government, any bill that goes to Parliament, any policy or new program, low carbon development strategy, poverty reduction, HIV/AIDS policy, housing program, water program, policies, these have all gone through the mill before they even reach the cabinet. They go to the relevant stakeholders. You have policies on mining sector, on environment and so on. These are all, before they reach cabinet, they involve civil society, they involve different stakeholders. And obviously, the government at some point has to make a decision of its own. It has to weigh all the different views of people and make a decision in what they think is their best judgment for the country. And so it isn't that everybody wins, but you win some. And so this view that the opposition behaves in Parliament, in the legislature, that if it's their way or no way. I mean, if you think back at the last 3 years of what compromises have been made at any one time in the Parliament, even on the most simplest of things, it has been by vote, majority. Knock it down, 31. When the opposition decides to defer matters, it's because they don't have the majority. They're not sure that they're going to get the 31 seats to vote. So that the opposition has been behaving in the opposition like a dictator, like a dictatorship of two parties that actually haven't even achieved as yet an alliance, electoral alliance, combination. All they have is that one seat more, and it's fragile. It's actually a political myth but they exercise it quite effectively in the Parliament, but not effectively for the country.
But how would you respond, though? The label of your government is out there already, that the
Yes.
PPP government is a dictatorship. How will you justify your argument that such a comment is unfounded? And secondly, on the same note, some of the examples that are being used about how the government is just sidelining decisions that are made by the Parliament includes cases where the president would have refused to assent to bills and so forth. They're using that as the argument to say that the government is doing whatever it wants, totally ignoring the Parliament.
To answer that last part, the Constitution went through a whole reform process, 1990 to 2001. And parts of the 1980 Constitution, which provided for an executive president, unlike pre-1980, which was a ceremonial president like Arthur Chung, the Constitution kept the right of the president, the prerogative of the president, to assent or not assent. The problem with the opposition, they're banging their head against the Constitution, which they supported, they demanded that it be amended in the 1999-2001, that key leaders of the opposition, at that time there was no AFC, but key leaders of what was the PNC, fragmented into PNC and APNU, AFC, supported this Constitution. They wanted these changes. But the part about the president's prerogatives, to assent or not assent, the prerogative of the president as the supreme authority to do with the budget and the finances through cabinet were retained. None of that was changed in the reform process. So the point that Mr. Greenwich in particular gets very, very hot under the collar to do with these non-assented bills, 4 I think are all of his, the government has said these were unconstitutional and we cannot support. This is what the president said formally to the Parliament. And in fact, I'll say to you, Eddie, that I was privy to discussions with the president, with the opposition, APNU, where he said, look, I can't sign these bills because they're unconstitutional as far as I'm advised. But you're free to approach the court. And if the court rules that I'm wrong, I will sign them. I will assent to them. That was over a year ago. They have not approached the courts at all because I believe they know that these bills are unconstitutional, that they violate the essence of the Constitution. But just last night, President Obama publicly announced through his spokesperson that he will not assent to a bill that they want to bring on the pipeline. He will not do it. He's saying it in advance. When our president said that, what was it, in 2012, that I will not assent to any bill that does not have the support of the government. There was a big hue and cry about this, that the president was being terrible, he wasn't being constitutional, he wasn't being democratic. The president has not signed to 4 bills. The U.S. Constitution, like our Constitution, provides for the president to have this prerogative. And in fact, President Obama, in this term of office, has used it twice already. And he's saying to the U.S. Congress, which is now Republican-controlled, both houses, that I'm not going to sign this thing.
Which is almost an ideal
It's
situation.
very parallel, very similar.
To a majority opposition.
Yeah, very, very similar. Very similar. And yet, the same Republicans who control both houses, in order to prevent the government from closing down, remember that happened a couple of years ago, they actually supported the budget for, what was it, like so many $1 trillion, just on the eve of the end of 2014. So this is the Republican Party is probably, it's an older party. It's also been one that in the main has probably had more mature leadership, that I would say, and wise leadership. I don't agree with many things of the Republican Party, but nevertheless, it has, at a number of moments in the last period of Obama in particular, have risen to the occasion for the interests of the country. There are other times, of course, when they don't. But this opposition, APNU and AFC, has not risen to the call to put nation first. It has gone on record for 3 years of doing the exact opposite, and basically reaching to the point where they felt that their dictatorship was so strong that they could then bring a motion of no confidence. And so, to the ordinary people who listen to and particularly one media house that churns out on a daily basis an onslaught against the PP civic government, certainly it can have an impact. But I believe that if people sit down in their quiet time and think about then and now, pre-92, now, are we perfect as a government? No. Have we made all the right decisions? No. But are we dictatorial? No, we're not. And are we a dictatorship? No, we're not. And so the issue that they have linked with dictatorship, because some recent lectures and workshops and statements by some of their spokespersons to do with the criminalized economy, a criminalized state, link into the issue of the accusation of a dictatorship. Look, this country has gone through some really challenging times since independence. But probably when we look at the media's role in the last 50 years, the media has played an extraordinarily important role, whether under colonialism, under the PNC regime, where whole day long you were being fed on a diet that everything was great with Burnham and the regime, and the opposition had no voice in the media whatsoever. And in this regime where the media is open, the media has played an important role. And when we look at the period of 2002 to 2008 violent crime wave, the media was constantly putting the government under siege in many ways. One was that Ghana was a failed state, the society was collapsing, and that, of course, the other accusation was that we were a narco state. And we have to remember that at that time we had a then Commissioner of Police, who is now a member of Parliament and a executive leader of the APNU, and we had a Chief of Staff who is also a supporter of the APNU, PNC. And in that period, both of them were not in helpful as they could have been in terms of bringing that crime wave under control. And part of it was because their allegiance was to the opposition and not to the Constitution and not to Guyana. And so their ambivalence, and I'm saying that as a Minister of Home Affairs, the ambivalence on very key occasions of dealing with what was going on is an indictment of the linkage in those days between the key heads of the law enforcement agencies and the opposition. And so the accusation of narco state became convenient to use in order to deflect from what serious leaders of the then military and police were involved with. And we have to remember the AK-47s being stolen and what happened there.
I'm happy that you touched on two of the other phrases I wanted us to discuss, and that has to do with the criminalized economy and criminalized state,
Yeah.
and so forth. And the kind of comments that you've been hearing for quite a while now. You mentioned 2008, 2002, 2008, all along. You hear these kind of comments about, and that is because of the increase in crime at that time. How do you respond to such a comment about Guyana being a criminalized state, has a criminalized economy, it's a narco state? How do you respond to?
Well, let's go back a bit. What is a criminalized state? What does that mean? Because a criminalized state is really talking about a state. And what is the state? The state is made up of the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, all three branches of government. That the state is criminalized, that the state has become a criminal, that the state is controlled by criminals. So when they're talking about criminalized state, they're talking about the legislature, they're talking about the judiciary, not just about the executive. And I think people have to understand that's what they're saying. The second issue of a criminalized economy is even more complex in that when they're talking about a criminalized state, the tar brush is hitting everybody. And basically, they're admitting
At the leadership level.
at the entire state, all the apparatus of the state is now
National
criminalized,
Assembly,
are
the
made up of
courts.
criminals. So you're talking about all the three branches of government and all the agencies within them. So this is wild. This is absolutely wild statements by the opposition. The issue of criminalized economy is an interesting one and also just as wild. Because the criminalized economy, and again, what is the economy? The economy in Guyana is market-driven. We can say, the PP Civic, that this is a capitalist economy. It's market-driven, but it is a capitalist economy that is people-oriented, has human programs, that it isn't a rabid capitalist state. And so you have social programs, you have housing programs that are subsidized by the state. So, what is the economy? The economy is, we're talking about a market-driven economy in which we're dealing with the relations between production and consumption, distribution and export, access. And so, who are involved with that? So they try to convey to the Guyanese public there's this small handful that is the criminalized economy. The economy of Guyana sits on production in the primary products that we produce, rice, sugar, gold, diamonds, timber, bauxite, and it also on services and on the consumers who purchase those, whether external or internal. So that is the opposition saying that the rice farmers, in 1992, by the way, 45,000 farmers gave up production, just stopped producing, could not afford it, didn't make any sense. So land left open. Today, rice production, farming, agriculture is on the move, and rice is produced, it's the largest it's ever done before. Is the opposition saying that these producers, because the rice production provides money, revenue to the economy, so the rest of us can get paid, we can fix roads, or whatever. Same thing with bauxite, for example. And agricultural production, whether it's in fish, in ground provisions, in other items. Is the opposition saying that farmers of this country who borrow money from the bank, who cultivate their lands, who sell their products, who take that money and buy equipment and fix up their houses and buy a car or a minibus or a tractor, that these are criminals? Because these catchphrases are extraordinarily dangerous. Is it saying that when a woman gets a small loan from Wow, for example, and decides she's going to take a little section of her house and make it into a hairdressing salon, she's producing a service. She pays the tax. She does her clients here. She makes money. She feeds her children. She pays her bills. She may have a mortgage with the bank. She pays that. Are all these people criminals? Because the driving force of the economy are the people of Guyana. The minibus drivers, the policemen, the hairdressers, the seamstresses, the caterers, the restaurant owners, the miners, the farmers. These, are people who push this economy along. And whether it's market vendors, whether it is businessmen, this is the power of the economy of Guyana. Sometimes maybe when we as a government speak, we talk about statistics. We give how much the economy has grown. We've had 9 years of uninterrupted economic growth, the first time in our history. What does that mean? How do we get there? Yes, we export items, and if the world price is good, we do well. When the world price doesn't do well, we have problems, like with gold. But who's producing the gold? Is the government producing the gold? Is the government a criminal? Is the government producing the gold? No. It is small miners, medium-sized miners, large miners, foreign-owned companies that are producing the gold. Or whether it is bauxite, it is companies, but it is the workers that are producing it. You have more industrial action, less production, production falls, impact on the economy. There's a linkage, and the opposition and its so-called intellectuals are trying to what you call fudge these issues. Because if the farmer doesn't produce and bring it to the marketplace, and the market vendor doesn't buy and put it on her stall and sell it, and there isn't a group of people who can afford to buy it, then she doesn't make any money. She then tells the farmer, I can't purchase as much from you as before. That's the economy. That's the economy. And this is what they're calling is a criminalized economy, where ordinary men and women make a decent living, an honest living, and they support their families. I'm not saying that they aren't criminals in Ghana. They are. But to say that whatever percentage they're talking about is what is running this economy is not true. Because if you don't have construction, if you don't have the ordinary men and women who are able to get a house lot, and they get their house lot and they go Tushan or Diamond or Parfait Harmony or whatever part of Guyana, and they go and borrow their money from the bank, their 5 million or whatever it is, and then they make their blocks and they get family members to help, or they may get a small contractor to help them. That's making the economy circulate. Money has to circulate in order for the economy to develop. And so this view of a criminalized economy, to me, of all the statements of the opposition have been making, is the wildest and also the most offensive to every Guyanese citizen. And every Guyanese citizen should be offended. Because basically they're saying to you, Eddie, you work here, you get your salary, you take care of your children, your home, and you decide you want to make your house let better, or you want to buy a new car. Are you involved with drugs? Are you a narcotic? A narcoman? Is this what they're saying to the majority of Guyanese people? So that these sweeping propagandistic catchphrases are, yes, part of the, par for the core as we come to elections. But in fact, they have been they've been simmering these things for quite a while. From the 2001 up. They haven't caught on. It hasn't caught on. And they will try to use this in the election year. But one has to, again, say to the opposition, if you live in glass houses, be careful. Because when they talk about criminalized economy, criminalized state, we can all point. We all know who is the biggest drug lawyer of Guyana? Historically, since I was a Minister of Home Affairs, one of the key drug lawyers of this country is a leader of a political party. You know, if we, and the connection with the underworld, the connection with the narco guys. I mean, I'm not saying he's benefiting financially, who knows, he gets paid. But the point is, if you live in glass houses, be careful. Because the connections of the opposition to their financiers and who is financing them. And isn't it rather interesting now that after Sheila Holder, I saw one of the papers said she brought a bill. She didn't. There was a motion brought by Sheila Holder to discuss the issue of campaign financing in the, 2009, 2010. And I was the chairperson of that committee. And we looked at all the different models and stuff. And it was a decision of the committee, all of us, opposition and government, APNU and AFC, that this would not be done for 2011 elections, but it would come back for it in the next parliament. There's been no interest on the part of the opposition to do with campaign financing. None in this parliament. And maybe, you know, if Sheila was around, she'd probably be very upset because this was one of our mantras. But when you see Mr. Harman saying that we really, you know, we don't want to disclose the names of our contributors, the election laws presently of Guyana require that the political parties at the end of the election submit their financial returns, etc., etc. And it might be interesting for a young journalist to find out when last PNC, now come APNU, has submitted their financial statements to the GCOM. And has AFC in its young life done that for the 2006 and 2011 elections? Have they? And it's the same kind of questions. The public has to answer the opposition. You can't be attacking the government in terms of integrity, and in which not one opposition member submits a report to the Integrity Commission, and in which the chairperson of the Integrity Commission requires concurrence between the opposition and the leader of the opposition and the president. So the president could name someone, the opposition leader could say, I don't agree, the president could go ahead and do it, but the caveat is this, that is the leader of the opposition and the president must agree on what their remuneration is. That's in the law. So let us say the president goes in and names somebody. The leader of the opposition says, no, I'm not agreeing to any payment. These are persons that hold constitutional positions. And so again, there's a checks and balance in the law and in the Constitution. Not one opposition member between 2001 to now, other than when they were in the PPP, submitted their returns, their declarations to the Integrity Commission. The issue is the law doesn't say that if there's no commission, you're not to submit. The law says you are required to submit. And therefore, we have to submit to the Integrity Commission. So you can't be, opposition is talking through two sides of their mouth all the time, you know. And therefore, the watchwords for the Guyanese population, I think, is that to demand from the opposition answers on these contradictions in what they're doing and saying.
But the comments about criminalized state and criminalized economy and so forth are made in the context of Guyana at a point where you're seeing an emerging middle class.
Yes, yes.
You know, more and more people are
Sure.
garnering wealth.
Sure.
Is it because of this? Do you think it's because of this you're hearing these sorts of comments?
I think that the dilemma for the opposition is this, and this is not a new dilemma. For example, in the early '92 government, the PNC won a number of regions, the regional chairman and regional, and there was this dilemma about their allocation for the budget. And so Region 10, for example, underperformed historically in spending their budget because the party was ambivalent about whether should you spend the money or make the government look bad in Region 10. So to now, the opposition's problem is this. If 67% of the population was below the poverty line in 91, 92, and 67 of the population is above the poverty line now, then where are these people and what are they doing? If you're going to be saying, as the opposition does, the country is worse than it was before, the country is collapsing, the economy is this, and the government's lying about all these issues, how do you explain the emergence of a new middle class? The old middle class of Guyana, going back to colonial times and the PNC regime, were the what do you call the classical old middle class. It came from professionals and also supporters of the PNC. And it was also very ethnically defined, mostly Portuguese and Afro-Guyanese and stuff like that. So that group has become much smaller because they have got smaller by attrition. The new middle class is made up of all Guyanese, of all ethnicities, who young people, middle-class people, middle-aged people, are able to buy, to build their house, to have a car, to open a little side shop at their house, whether it's selling things, whether it is having a hairdressing salon, or whether it is a mechanic shop or whatever. This is the middle class of Guyana. The middle class of Guyana has emerged. The problem with the old middle class, many of them in the leadership of the PNC, the old PNC, many of them in the present leadership of the AFC, is that where did all these people come from? What is their lineage? They don't know their lineage. Young people who are coming from Den Amstel, from Virgin from Enmore, from Enterprise, and coming and being able to improve themselves and improve the quality of their life. They don't have no lineage for the old middle class. You can't say your great-grandfather was X or your grandfather was X. This is how the traditional middle class operates. So you have this new middle class that is burgeoning all over the place, and they're spending money. They're big consumers. And this is also what is driving the economy. To indicate or to imply that these people are involved with narcotics or involved in some illegal activity or criminal activity is an offense. And basically it is the opposition not living up to what Guyana has become. That you have a working class and you have an emerging, significant sized middle class who are living a more comfortable lifestyle than 20, 30 years ago. And who, their next generation, will then benefit from the fruits of this one. So that this new middle class, this new private sector, this new civil society are what is driving this economy. When you look at the economy of Guyana, it is the private commercial credit that is driving the economy. And so in fairness, the opposition actually, to me, owes an apology to the Guyanese people for many things. They should be having a mea culpa moment where, they say we apologize to the Guyanese people for having rigged elections from 1968, 73, 80, 85, mea culpa. Just like the Pope apologized for certain things, and different countries have gone and apologized for wrongs that were done 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, they owe us apology.
But as a country moving forward, I mean, we continue to hear these kinds of statements, these loose statements and labelings of not just political labelings or labelings of political parties, but based on the analysis that you have given, this is a case where we have ordinary Guyanese, hardworking, honest Guyanese being labeled because of the fact, not individually, but because of the fact that they fall within a certain group who's making a certain contribution to the economy. How do we move forward as a country that, an emerging democracy, a country that wants to be part and parcel of the modern world?
I think post-2011, there was a view that we could work out an agreement with the opposition, a modus vivendi in the interests of Guyana. All the efforts, every time, have failed. Whether it was on budget 2012, 2013, 2014, whether it was on money laundering, they trying to get the passage of the money laundering bill. I mean, now Guyana, every 6 months, we have to go to give a progress report to FATF, and I think Minister has to do it sometime in January, February this year. We review it every 6 months. The amount of time and energy it takes to comply with that, outside of what are the difficulties with being under review and the slowing down of transactions and so forth in the banking sector, or these are issues that Guyana could have come first, and we could have come first. But the opposition has rebuffed all of these. And so the issue that we're confronted now with is, regrettably, at this point, again, the choice of, are there opportunities for dialogue? And these were rebuffed in December by the opposition. Again, it is all or nothing on their position. You go back to Parliament, then we'll move the no confidence motion, then we kick you out. We're not going to speak to you until you go back to Parliament. And by the way, when you go back to Parliament, we'll bring in the no confidence motion and we can kick you out. This cannot be the behavior of wise, rational leadership.
But while all of this happening, coming back to the point I'm making and the question I asked,
Yeah.
the fact that while all of this is happening at the political level,
Right.
you have statements that are affecting the average Guyanese.
Sure.
And the issue here, I'm somehow suspecting at some point, it may very well have some impact, some psychological impact on people, saying
course
that,
it
you know
will.
what, hey, I gotta look how I'm working and whether I'm earning and develop myself, because
Yeah.
I'll be labeled as
Sure.
as a drug trafficker or a criminal.
Yeah. I mean, certainly, I think how does the public respond to that? The public can do a number of things: ignore it and let it die, or respond to it and say, you're offensive to us and we're not agreeing with this and we will not accept it. And by the way, if you continue to say that, we're not going to vote for you. But I mean, so the public has the power in their hands. The public has the power in their hands, not the persons who are saying it. And I think the electorate has to know that they're powerful. They determine, ultimately, it is the electorate of the country who will determine the fate of this country when we go to elections. They will determine. And so, as I said, the choices are sit down, have dialogue. 2, go to elections. And maybe after elections, depending on what happens, that one is able to start again looking for the kind of political solution to our political dilemma that we face here. It would have been nice to have used the period in prorogation to maybe have sane ahead, sit down and see what we could do. Regrettably, that hasn't worked, and it appears not even to be working amongst themselves, between the APNU and AFC, on what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but what I see in the papers, that there's this tussle about, what seems to me pedantic and procedural matters, but maybe they're right, that's their call. But ultimately, for the PPPC, for the APNU, AFC, the power is in the hands of the electorate. And it is the electorate that has to sift through all this noise, as I call it, the noise that is coming from some media houses and the noise coming from the opposition. I don't mind if someone comes to me with an outlandish accusation and then tries to defend it with sensible arguments or with facts, whether I agree with the facts or not. But that's not what's happening. People are coming out with wild accusations, and there's no rationale, justification for it. Because what they're trying to do is to get into people's head and say, oh yeah, Donald's dictatorship, PPP Civic is dictatorship, there's a criminalized economy, there's a failed state. All of this is just utter garbage. But there's a lot of noise, and people are generally, when people have too much noise around them, they turn off, or they can get emotionally charged. And I think the electorate has to recognize that the power they hold in their hands will determine what happens
But the,
in the elections.
how much of an opportunity, I mean, the electorate um, is getting to maybe deal, to get a good understanding of whether these arguments that are put forward are actually solid arguments? Because you have made the connection and you have mentioned the fact that you have certain media houses who are pushing that particular line.
Yeah.
Maybe with no explanation, no proper analysis of whether Guyana is really a dictatorship, whether it's a criminalized state, whether it's a criminalized economy. How much, and this is where I think you're getting to the point of where the media has a role to play to really be the middleman and really analyze and present the facts.
The fourth estate is expected to do that, but I don't think the fourth estate in Guyana has not reached that level of maturity as a body, as a total body. I think that, as I pointed out in the beginning, 20 radio stations, 20 TV stations, 13 radio stations, 3 newspapers, dailies are controlled by private people. And the majority of those bodies are not friendly to the government. Majority. Some are, but majority are not friendly to the government. Therefore, the people are under siege in terms of constant bombardment of what is misinformation, disinformation. And therefore, one of the biggest challenges for the government and for the PPC is to be able to connect with people, to talk to people at bottom house meetings, to explain, to try to give the other side. In fact, in this context, it is that is not where the government controls the media in this country. It is the non-PPP that controls the media, and therefore have a great say in what they say to the public. And the astuteness of the Guyanese population, particularly electorate, will have to sift through all that.
But I think we're going to close our discussions here, but I think you've raised a very important point, and this has to do with responsibility of the media. And I think I think that makes for very good discussion, sometime in the future to talk about the role of the media, the level of responsibility that is shown by media houses, and how their responsibility not only to those who the political colleagues or political friends or so forth,
right,
but their responsibility as the fourth estate and as a guardian for the people. So I think that will make for a very good discussion in the future.
I think that's a critical issue we need to talk about, because if we trace as I said, the history of the last 50 years of the media's role in Guyana, it has played a critical role historically, from colonial times right through to today, in influencing public opinion. And as I said, in the first PV government, or the PV government in the 60s, the then media was controlled by the British. And, we were accused of being communist. And there were all sorts, I remember as a child reading in the newspapers what the communists were going to do to us as children. And this was being written by, media, by newspapers. We didn't have television or anything then. In the period when we have been in government, we've opened up the press. In the days when the Mirror newspaper couldn't get newsprint to print because it was not allowed by the government to bring it in, to import it. We had to borrow newsprint from Catholic Standard and so on, people like Father Morrison and so on. So that the media, whilst we are moving, whilst this country's democracy is emerging and democratic norms and traditions and practice, constitutional laws have been in the last 22 years evolving, and we're building, a democratic nation, the media has not, in general, gone through that evolution, and in fact has stayed in its rut. Those who are anti-government and those who are for government. They're two different things. So the issue of balanced reporting, of getting comments, of not being attacking people's personal lives. I mean, I read a column the other day that made my skin crawl as a woman. It was an attack by, the usual, one of the columnists, who spoke about a minister, a female minister, and of course he's the one, and the AFC have called her Satira Gal. It was a most offensive and vulgar piece of journalism in speaking about a woman in particular, forget a woman, a minister. And it worries me that there's no outcry by anybody, including the women's movement, but, that's my usual beef I carry on with, so that's nothing new. But the media is the guardian of information and making sure the public get fair, balanced information. The public then makes their decision whether they agree or don't, or they like it or not. And so the media is an issue I think we should discuss, particularly as we come closer to elections. And we have to remember that because of the very bad history in the 97 period with the media in Guyana and the attacks and racial hostility and violence by the media of Guyana, we were almost like a verge of Rwanda again in this country, that one, GCOM established the Media Monitoring Unit. The Constitution was amended. The issue of the Racial Hostility Act was further amended, for example, and then even led to the Broadcasting Act of 2011, enshrining, in terms of broadcasting, the broadcaster's responsibilities of fair comment, of balanced comment, of not to incite racial or ethnic violence and so on and stuff like that. So I think that if we need to discuss the Fourth Estate, it has not lived up to the expectations of what it is in political science and what it is in political theory. The Fourth Estate is a critical factor in a democratic nation.
Madam Tashira, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. Of course, our discussions broadly on governance, but we would have spoken about a number of areas and a number of comments that are being made by politicians that will impact the Guyanese at large, and statements like describing Guyana as a dictatorship, criminalized state, criminalized economy, narco state, failed state, etc., etc. And of course, coming to the end of our discussions, we spent some time talking about the role of the media in this entire process of educating Guyanese and giving Guyanese accurate information. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you very much for joining us, too. Have a good rest of the evening.